E vamos chegando aqui, queria convidar a galera que está aí pela praça, porque agora o bicho vai pegar nessa mesa. É uma das mais aguardadas aqui da nossa programação da Feira do Livro. É uma mesa de poesia que traz aqui um autor internacional que ganhou o Prêmio Pulitzer, um dos principais prêmios literários do mundo. Eu queria fazer um recado breve antes de convidar os nossos autores ao palco. Eu queria registrar a presença aqui na feira do deputado Marcelo Freixo, também da deputada Renata Souza, já passaram por aqui a deputada Marina Elu também, e o deputado Eduardo Suplicy. Então é uma alegria ter parlamentares comprometidos com o livro aqui na Feira do Livro. Eu queria então, vamos dar início ao nosso debate, eu queria lembrar a vocês que nós vamos transmitir a tradução simultânea nos alto-falantes. Assim como nas outras mesas que vocês viram agora da Patrícia, por exemplo, a tradução vai ser transmitida nos alto-falantes. E aí, quem quiser ouvir o áudio original, precisa pegar o headset ali no fundo do palco. Então, quem quiser ouvir em inglês, pegue o headset no fundo do palco. A parte da leitura de poesia, da fala de poesia do Jericho Brown vai ser em inglês direto. Nós vamos jogar direto por causa da força da performance dele. E, em seguida, a tradutora dele, que é a mediadora também, vai fazer a leitura também desse mesmo poema traduzido. Então, fica essa a dinâmica dessa mesa. Eu queria convidar, então, a subir ao palco, por favor. Jericho Brown, por favor, seja bem-vindo ao palco da Feira do Livro. Muito obrigado. Por favor, se pudesse acomodar ali. E nós temos aqui uma oportunidade incrível, uma honra de receber a poeta, tradutora, crítica literária, Stephanie Borges, que veio também para conduzir a conversa. Muito obrigado. A Stephanie é uma das principais vozes aí da crítica literária, da literatura e da tradução literária no Brasil hoje. E é uma honra poder contar com o trabalho dela aqui. Ela traduziu esse livro, chama A Tradição, que foi publicado pelo Círculo de Poemas, que é um projeto incrível de circulação de poesia, por assinatura, também vende em livrarias. Então, convido vocês a conhecer o Círculo de Poemas e agradecemos ao Círculo de Poemas pela presença do Jericho, por viabilizar a presença dele aqui. Certo? Stephanie, estamos com você. Muito obrigado, viu?
Hello.
Muito obrigada. Quero agradecer a presença de vocês aqui. Já estou vendo vários amigos na plateia, que alegria. Bom, gente, vamos começar pelo começo, fazer uma breve apresentação. Jericho Brown nasceu na Louisiana, Estados Unidos, em 1976. Recebeu uma série de bolsas e prêmios por seus livros, como a Guggenheim Fellowship, o American Book Award, National Endowment for the Arts. Atualmente é professor na Universidade Emory, em Atlanta, além de diretor do programa de escrita criativa escrita criativa da instituição, a Universidade Emory, no caso. E, em 2020, ganhou o Prêmio Pulitzer por A Tradição. Bom, esse é o primeiro livro do Jericho que nós temos aqui no Brasil. Ele tem outros 2 livros que ainda não vieram para o português, o New Testament e o Homeland, além de ter poemas esparsos publicados em diferentes publicações de poesia. Mas vamos começar. Eu queria começar a nossa conversa com uma pergunta que é a seguinte. Embora esse livro se chame A Tradição, em português, a gente assume que é uma tradição. Mas, lendo ele com cuidado, eu sei que existem várias tradições aqui dentro dele. As pessoas associam rapidamente a uma tradição da poesia grega, a qual você menciona logo no primeiro poema, mas eu acho que elas não prestam muita atenção, que você o tempo todo está referenciando poesia negra, autores negros, por exemplo, Gwendolyn Brooks, Mary Evans. Você fala de artes plásticas, porque você escreve um poema a partir de uma série de obras do Taito Cafar, que é um artista negro contemporâneo com um trabalho maravilhoso. Então, eu queria que você falasse um pouco de quais tradições negras que compõem esse livro.
It's hard to narrow down because there are so many, and I feel myself to be a descendant of all the black people in the United States in particular, but throughout this world, who have in some way managed to, in spite of being the people who are supposed to be incapable of reading, have managed to write such beautiful work all over this world, you know, from Derek Walcott to Senghor to, in the United States, to people like James Baldwin. There's a poem, as you know, in the book, which is called Another Country. It's named after a James Baldwin novel. There's a poem called After Essex Hemphill, which was a queer black poet in the United States who died of AIDS in the 1990s. Those people come together to be my spirits, the people that I imagine speaking to me as I am writing. I understand myself as a product of their lives. I would not be able to exist as I am if they had not existed. And I think, most importantly for me, I definitely would not be what folk think of as a success story. Any success I have, I would not have been able to have 10 years earlier. You know, I'm living on the back of about 10 years. I mean, there's so much work that has been done before my birth, and then before my first book came out, and then before I got my first job teaching poetry. Before, there are all these people who did this work, sort of laying the groundwork so that it would be possible for me to do the work and be recognized for it. And part of what I mean to do in the tradition is to recognize all of those people who did the work I'm doing without recognition. You think of this in many ways in the United States as appropriation. You know, something as simple as certain kinds of dance styles, like voguing, which clearly comes from the black community, gets appropriated, and you begin to think of it as something Madonna invented. Madonna did not invent it. Do you understand what I mean? So it's an opportunity through poetry to pay homage to my ancestors, both my literal ancestors who were slaves. They were enslaved people. Both my literal ancestors who were sharecroppers, and my ancestors who imagined me before I was born. The wonderful thing about Gwendolyn Brooks, about Langston Hughes, about Claude McKay, is that they had some sense that I might be possible. And I find that fascinating, because why would you think that I could be in the 1920s? These are people of great imagination. And I never met them, and I love them.
Porque as pessoas, quando começam, né, a ler os poemas, percebem rapidamente que você está mobilizando alguns temas, né, não só as referências, né, os jogos com a poesia grega, mas você também está falando de uma vida familiar, de uma sociabilidade negra. E uma coisa que me chamou muita atenção é que você tem vários poemas sobre plantas, jardinagem. Isso era presente na sua vida? Isso fazia parte da sua infância, da sua juventude? Você planta hoje em dia?
I did have a garden in my old house, and then I moved. And when I moved to my new house, I don't have a garden now because my life has changed such that I travel so much that anything I try to plant, I end up killing. So I feel very bad about that, and so I've given up. But I will say I grew up with a sense of pride about the land. On both sides of my family, it was understood that we were from people who, at one time, were not allowed to own anything. And so when someone owned a plot of land, it became very important. My father also quite literally mowed lawns for a living. So I grew up planting flower beds, mowing lawns, learning to care for the natural world. And I think my care for the natural world became very important to me in this book because I understand the natural world to be endangered, particularly in a nation where, I mean, for instance, you know, people couldn't see in front of them in New York just a couple days ago because of the fires coming from Canada. We have huge environmental concerns throughout this world, and definitely in the United States, in the Americas. Do you know what I mean? I think that concern becomes very important in this book for me for two reasons. One, because it is a concern I know other people do not necessarily imagine black people having. When we think of black people's concerns, we love to box them in as if they would not intersect with other people's concerns, which is the second reason. I believe that we live in a world where if we were to really be a people who cared for our environment, we would also be a people who cared about things like race, who cared about things like queer identity. I think these things are connected to one another. It is interesting to me that the enemy of these issues, the enemy of the environment, the enemy of understanding that black people are human, the enemy of those things is a common enemy. And so if that's a common enemy, then we have a sort of responsibility to understand where these things intersect such that we can properly fight for them, if that makes sense. I should add, much of the Greek and classical allusion made in the book happens partially because I want more than ever for people to understand that that too is mine. That being black, particularly being black in the United States, means that I get to know everything I know about my people, but I also know everything about everybody else too, which is a condition. You know, if you are a white person in the United States, you might not have to or might not feel like you need to know about black culture, no matter how much it's influencing your life. Do you see what I mean? Whereas you don't have that right, you don't have that privilege as a black person in the United States. You better know about assimilated culture. And so one of the things that I want to do is I want to give you Ganymede. I want to give you Leda and the Swan. But when I do those things, I know that they are coming from me. And so I know you will have to see them blackly. Isn't that lovely to think of Aphrodite blackly? I like that. Let's think about Adonis blackly. Do you see what I mean? Isn't that fun? Do more of that on your own time. He liked that. He started thinking about it. He got excited. I like that.
Você está provocando a imaginação da plateia. As pessoas vão começar a pensar agora de uma outra forma.
Yes, good.
Você tocou numa questão que eu acho também que chama muita atenção no livro, que é justamente tratar pessoas negras de formas complexas. Então, você tem diferentes personagens que fazem inúmeras coisas, desde um pai que compra frutas para crianças até um sujeito que esconde um corpo. Você tem mães negras, você tem... E todas essas... Você consegue imprimir características nesses personagens com uma concisão muito grande. A gente lê o poema e a gente consegue ver as cenas, a gente consegue imaginar essas pessoas. Eu queria saber, assim, como foi o seu trabalho para chegar nesses personagens e nessas imagens.
I don't know why I think I have this gift because I understood very early on, this is a bit out of time. What I'm about to say is a bit out of time. It's a bit anachronistic. But I figured out very early that my mother and father loved me. And I loved my mother and father. I remember very distinctly sitting in the back seat of the car and hearing my mother sing and thinking, Whitney Houston could not do better than this. Do you know, because it was my mom. I remember eating my mother's food thinking, oh, I feel so sorry for all these other people with these other mothers. They are not making biscuits like my mom's biscuits. You know, I loved my mother. My parents loved me dearly, deeply, worked very hard. When I say very hard, sun up to sundown, with their hands, worked in ways that they thought would help ensure my success as a grown man. They also would beat the shit out of me. Those same human beings. Do you know what I mean? They were very violent people. People would always see us, me and my sister, and they would say, oh my God, your children, they're so respectful. And we would think, no, we're so afraid. I have always had this understanding that human beings are complex creatures and should be. And that whenever you are looking at someone, you see what you see, but you don't know everything. Do you know what I mean? Part of my attraction to poetry is that I feel that poetry itself, you know it's good because it feels like a living organism. It feels like a living organism because every time you read a poem you love, you see something different. Isn't that crazy? Same words. Do you know what I mean? People reading The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost for almost 100 years now. Same words. Do you follow me? And yet you see something new. And I think that is a relationship we have to one another as people. Definitely a relationship we have when we fall in love, right? We find something else about the person we love and we're like, wow, that too? Do you know what I mean? And so whenever I am making the poems in my book, I want the characters to be people. I don't want them to be symbols. I don't want them to stand for anything in particular. I want them to do what people do. I want to love them, and I want them to love me, and I want them to make mistakes, and I want them to be whole. There's this moment in a Yusef Komunyakaa poem. It's a poem called My Father's Love Letters, and it's a poem that changed my life because it's a poem about his father being violent toward his mother, and his mother running away from the father. And in that poem, what I really love is that there's a moment that he mentions his father stealing roses and hyacinth from other people's yards so that he can plant them in his own yard to make his yard beautiful. Do you see what I mean? So what is that? Let's arrest the guy. He's stealing. Or is that I have to do what I can to make a beautiful environment for my family? Do you see what I mean? And that's what I want from my poems. That's what I want from any poems that I am reading.
Eu acho muito importante você falar disso, porque acredito que tenha muita gente que tem interesse em escrever poesia aqui no público. E, muitas vezes, eu acho que pessoas que fazem parte de minorias raciais, né, dissidentes de gênero, muitas vezes estão lidando com uma expectativa externa de que elas devam escrever sempre sobre um determinado assunto, ou que elas estejam sempre argumentando por uma causa. E os seus poemas, eles justamente são um grande convite da gente para a liberdade criativa, né? De escrever sobre qualquer tema, sobre investir numa complexidade não só do assunto, mas da forma, porque você tem um trabalho de linguagem extremamente cuidadoso. Em alguns momentos eu pensei, o que eu estou fazendo da minha vida traduzindo isso aqui? Mas eu queria que você dissesse, então, para as pessoas aqui, o que você recomenda, assim, para para as pessoas que estão querendo dicas de como se engajar com a própria poesia, tentando achar a própria voz, os próprios assuntos?
Well, first I should say thank you, Stephanie, for that compliment, because I know you to be a fantastic poet and a really great translator. And I should take this moment to thank you for this translation. And I would like for us to give Stephanie a hand, quite seriously. I cannot read Portuguese, so I have to go on what I'm told. But I will tell you this, the book is already in a second printing. I have more Instagram followers than ever before. And people send me messages to let me know how beautiful the translation is. And so I'm very grateful, quite literally, very grateful to you. I hope you are getting these messages too. I should send them to you, actually, about how beautiful the translation is, seriously. I think it is important. I think I'm often asked what the responsibility of the poet is. And I think it's as simple as telling the truth. And if you put your attention on telling truth through specific language, if you love language first, then you will be fine. You will write the poems of your life. But if you try to do other things, you put yourself in a position where you are doing something other than writing poetry. By that, what I mean, yes, my poems are political, but I do not sit down to write a political poem. I was telling someone this the other day. If I mention my hair in a poem, it's because my hair is on my head. But if someone who does not have my hair reads the poem, they are going to see political intentions behind me mentioning my hair. They are welcome to it. Go for it. Do the work. Read your face off, honey. You know what I'm saying? That is what the reader should be doing. They should be finding meaning in the work. That is not my job. Now, I live a life every day. I have lived in a nation where it has been okay for police to accost me throughout my life for absolutely no reason. I have quite literally been thrown across the hood of a police car from walking, in a neighborhood, walking from one house to another because they didn't understand why I was in that neighborhood, so they decided that they should beat me up. Do you know what I'm saying? So, if I write about my experience, I am writing about my experience as it is. And if someone wants to make that political, do what you need to do about that political problem. In the meantime, my job is not to make it political. It's to tell you, in a poem, I got thrown across a police car for no reason. Do you see what I mean? That's literal. That happened. So often I find that if we can tell ourselves the truth, the whole truth about our lives, Muriel Rukeyser said if one woman were to stand up and tell the truth about her life, the world would explode. Do you know what I mean? So if we tell the truth, what happens? And for me, what's most important and what I am always doing first is paying attention to the metaphor, paying attention to language, paying attention to the sound of words. I want to be pleased by the sound of words. I want to be attracted to the poem because of them. And that attraction is what keeps me writing poems. And in the moment, I'm moving associatively through language. But I'm not thinking, oh, somebody's going to read this poem and change their mind about X. Now, I hope somebody reads this poem and changes their mind about X. But I don't think about that while writing the poem. While writing the poem, I have to think about what comes next. What is the next line? What follows? Do you see what I mean? And I think it's very important to understand that when I'm writing, when I'm doing it at my best, it feels like play. I'm having a good time. And I do not care about success when I'm writing poems. I write every day. I do not sit down to write as if I'm going to get up at the end of that and have a poem. I sit down to write because I understand I am training myself toward a poem. There will someday be a poem. In the meantime, I'm making all this play. I'm moving stuff around. I'm taking this stanza that was at the bottom and putting it at the top and hoping for the best. Do you understand what I mean? And you have to you gotta love that. If you wanna love money, if you wanna love a prize, if you wanna love a Pulitzer Prize, if you wanna love attention, if you wanna love a big audience of people coming to see you in Brazil, then you should not be a poet. You have to be a poet because you love to write poetry. Not even because you have a bunch of poems that are done. Just because you love to write poetry, that doing it feels good to you. You know, like making love. You know what I mean? Or like the feeling you have petting your dog. Feels good to you. It feels good to your dog, too. Do you know what I'm saying? And if you can get into that feeling, the zone of that feeling, if you can hold that feeling for the duration of the time it takes you during your writing time during the day, you will end up with poems. You will hopefully end up with a trip to Brazil. Do you understand what I mean? Y'all are sweet. Thank you.
É muito importante você falar sobre essa questão da gente se divertir escrevendo poesia, porque eu, às vezes, me pergunto se, por eu ser uma mulher negra e por eu ser poeta e tradutora, as pessoas vêm me perguntar assim... mas como foi escrever o seu livro? Como foi traduzir a Tradição? Como se elas estivessem esperando uma história triste. E eu só posso dizer que eu me diverti e aprendi muito. Então, assim, é sempre bom quando a gente escuta poetas, escritores que estão falando sobre esse prazer do texto, esse prazer da linguagem. Porque, assim, eu me diverti traduzindo o seu livro. Em alguns momentos eu tive dúvida, mas, por exemplo, o seu poema sobre o cabelo, eu adorei. O meu livro inteiro é sobre cabelo.
Yeah.
Então, eu acho que essa questão do prazer com o trabalho, com a escrita, né, a busca do melhor poema possível, isso é sempre uma coisa também que nos tira desse lugar da pessoa negra que está tentando fazer alguma coisa didática, edificante, e mostrar que a gente tem uma agência criativa que é a nossa, né? Que dialoga com as nossas histórias, as nossas referências e, principalmente, com a nossa relação com a palavra.
Can I add also, I just want to say... I feel that artist communities are so important, but in poetry, it's more than important, it's necessary. Poets have a relationship among one another that is not the same relationship, I think, that musicians have among one another or that visual artists have among one another. You know, I can call my poet friend at 2 a.m. and say, I think I got something. And my poet friend will turn over in the bed from their spouse and say, let me hear what you got. And you know, if I was playing trombone, I wouldn't be able to do that. You know, if I was a sculptor, I wouldn't be able to do that, you know? And there's something that we have in common. And so you mentioned that there are younger writers in the audience. And I think the important thing is that you be around the community. You have to go to the readings. You have to take the classes. You have to read. The wonderful thing about being a poet is nobody's a star. Everybody is doing something to serve poetry. Every poet, I don't know a poet who is only writing poetry. Every poet I know is teaching or writing a blog or writing reviews or running workshops or organizing a press. Or do you understand what I mean? And that kind of grassroots feeling is the feeling that is part of what makes poetry what it is. When you read a poem, you are participating in community. You mentioned earlier that you were watching Claudia Rankine speak, and she mentioned me. And then because she mentions me, you read my book. Claudia Rankine was my teacher in school. And so suddenly the community that she has created with me, you become a part of that community. Do you see what I mean? I mean, literally. That community also puts you in a position where you have someone you can share with. Writing poems can be lonely. You have to emerge from it sometimes. And when you emerge from it, it's nice to have somebody there. And your poet friends are not mad at you. They're not mad that you disappeared. They know you disappeared because you were writing poems. Do you know what I mean? I think that's a very important community, is a very important part of what we do. And it changes things.
Só para vocês entenderem, o Jericho estava fazendo referência à nossa conversa lá nos bastidores, porque ele me perguntou como eu conhecia os poemas dele. E aí eu falei que foi ouvindo a entrevista da Claudia Rankine, em que ela mencionou o trabalho dele, e aí como, sou uma grande admiradora do trabalho dela, também traduzi, Cidadã e o Só Nós, fui atrás, obviamente, do trabalho do Jericho. Então, ela acabou criando esse encontro aqui, em parte se deve a uma dica de Claudia Rankine em algum momento.
I think it's also the reason why we have to understand that poets are not and should not be pop stars, The work that Beyonce is doing, which is work I love, I dance to it. I actually managed to get a ticket to the concert. I'm wearing little when I go. Anyway, so that work is work that goes from that one person out to a world, out to a very large audience. When you read a poem, no matter what happens, no matter how many people hear the poem, it is always one person to one person. Isn't that amazing? People are always like, why don't more people know about poetry? Why aren't more people reading poetry? Because it's one person to one person. When you read a poem, it's you and that poem. Somewhere behind that is the poet. Do you see what I mean? But that's it. And I think that is one of the most beautiful things about our art. We are the most intimate art, and therefore the most vulnerable. It makes me very happy to have what we have.
Nós falamos muito dos seus poemas, mas agora eu vou pedir para você ler, para quem ainda não leu, para quem ainda não teve contato, te ouvir um pouco.
I should say this. I don't know how you translated this phrase, 40 in the morning. I'm interested to know. But I should just say this is a very specific phrase to a specific state, Louisiana, where I am from, to the American South in the United States. 40 in the morning. My mother grew morning glories that spilled onto the walkway toward her porch, because she was a woman with land who showed as much by giving it color. She told me I could have whatever I worked for. That means she was an American. But she'd say it was because she believed in God. I am ashamed of America and confounded by God. I thank God for my citizenship in spite of the timer set on my life to write these words. I love my mother. I love black women who plant flowers as sheepish as their sons. By the time the blooms unfurl themselves for a few hours of light, the women who tend them are already at work. blue. I'll never know who started the lie that we are lazy, but I'd love to wake that bastard up at 4 in the morning, toss him in a truck, and drive him under God past every bus stop in America to see all those black folk waiting to go work for whatever they want. A house, a boy to keep the lawn cut, some color in the yard. My God, we leave things green. Keep going.
Que momento, gente.
I'll read a poem titled Bullet Points. Bullet Points, I should say, rises out of a tradition in the United States where there are people committing suicide, supposedly committing suicide while in police custody, and yet under very strange circumstances. Examples, do I have time? Examples of this, a young man in North Carolina, Jesus Huerta, somehow, supposedly, while handcuffed, after having been patted down, on the walk from the police car to the building where he was to be booked, supposedly somehow managed to shoot himself in the back corner of his head. Victor White III in Louisiana, where I'm from, who, after having been patted down while handcuffed, sitting in the back seat of a police car, somehow managed to shoot himself in his upper back. Or Sandra Bland in Texas, a case more people are familiar with after a day of fighting for her life, hung herself with a trash bag in the cell where she was put. It's very strange, though, because in that same cell, there's video. There's a live feed of everyone. But in Sandra Bland's particular cell, that video footage goes out, and we're told by the coroner that there's technical difficulty and that the video footage must have gone out at the exact same moment that she hung herself with a trash bag. So that's where this poem comes from. Bullet points. I will not shoot myself in the head, and I will not shoot myself in the back, and I will not hang myself with a trash bag. And if I do, I promise you, I will not do it in a police car while handcuffed or in the jail cell of a town I only know the name of because I have to drive through it to get home. Yes, I may be at risk, but I promise you, I trust the maggots who live beneath the floorboards of my house to do what they must to any carcass more than I trust an officer of the law of the land to shut my eyes like a man of God might, or to cover me with a sheet so clean my mother could have used it to tuck me in. When I kill me, I will do it the same way most Americans do. I promise you, cigarette smoke, or a piece of meat on which I choke, or so broke I freeze in one of these winters we keep calling worst. I promise if you hear of me dead anywhere near a cop, then that cop killed me. He took me from us and left my body, which is, no matter what we've been taught, greater than the settlement a city can pay a mother to stop crying, and more beautiful than the new bullet fished from the folds of my brain. Brigado. And I'll read you a duplex. The duplex is a form that I invented. It is at once a hustle, a sonnet, and a blues poem. And I think you will hear all those three forms come out as I read the poem and when you hear the translation. Duplex. I begin with love, hoping to end there. I don't want to leave a messy corpse. I don't want to leave a messy corpse full of medicines that turn in the sun. Some of my medicines turn in the sun. Some of us don't need hell to be good. Those who need most need hell to be good. What are the symptoms of your sickness? Here is one symptom of my sickness. Men who love me are men who miss me. Men who leave me are men who miss me in the dream where I am an island. In the dream where I am an island, I grow green with hope. I'd like to end there. Thank you. Obrigado. Obrigado. Oh, obrigado. Thank you.
Now I'm going to be brave and read your poems to you.
Please, please, I'm very excited.
Para quem estiver com o livro e quiser acompanhar, a gente começa na página 22. Antes do nascer do dia, minha mãe cultivava glórias da manhã que se espalhavam pela calçada diante da varanda, porque era uma mulher dona de seu chão e mostrava isso lhe dando cor. Ela dizia que eu podia ter qualquer coisa pela qual trabalhasse. Isso queria dizer que ela era uma americana, mas ela diria que era porque acreditava em Deus. Tenho vergonha da América e Deus me confunde. Dou graças a Deus pela minha cidadania, apesar do tempo escasso que tenho para escrever essas palavras. Eu amo minha mãe. Eu amo mulheres negras que plantam flores acanhadas feito seus filhos. No momento em que os botões desabrocham, por umas poucas horas de luz, as mulheres que cuidam deles já estão no trabalho. Nunca saberei quem inventou a mentira de que somos preguiçosos. Mas adoraria acordar o maldito, ainda de madrugada, enfiá-lo num caminhão e levá-lo perante Deus por todos os pontos de ônibus do país para ver todo aquele povo preto esperando para ir trabalhar para ter o que quiser. Uma casa, um menino para manter a grama cortada, alguma cor no quintal. Meu Deus, a gente torna as coisas verdes. Obrigada. Agora, na página 24, vou contar uma pequena anedota de tradução aqui, que bullet points são aqueles tópicos, né, que a gente abre no texto. E aí existe uma ambiguidade intraduzível e parte do trabalho do tradutor é admitir a derrota, né? Então, assim, essa é uma das minhas derrotas nesse livro. Porém, enfim, a bala... Vocês vão ver a bala no poema em algum lugar. Pontos importantes. Eu não vou me dar um tiro na cabeça, e eu não vou me dar um tiro nas costas, e eu não vou me asfixiar com um saco de lixo. E se fizer isso, te juro, eu não vou fazer isso dentro de um carro da polícia, estando algemado, ou numa cela de delegacia, numa cidade da qual só sei o nome porque preciso passar por ela para chegar em casa. Sim, eu posso estar em risco, mas juro, confio mais nas larvas que moram debaixo das tábuas do piso da minha casa para fazer o que é preciso com uma carcaça do que num agente da lei nesse país para fechar os meus olhos como um homem de Deus faria. Ou me cobrir com um lençol limpo, tão limpo quanto o que a minha mãe teria usado para me aconchegar. Quando me matar, farei do mesmo jeito que a maioria dos americanos, eu juro. Fumaça de cigarro, ou um pedaço de carne me fizeram engasgar, ou, de tão pobre, congelei num desses invernos que ainda chamamos de o pior de todos. Juro que se você ouvir que estou morto em qualquer lugar perto de um policial, então aquele policial me matou. Ele me tirou de nós e abandonou meu corpo, que é, independentemente do que nos foi ensinado, mais valioso que o acordo que uma cidade pode pagar para uma mãe parar de chorar, e mais belo que a bala novinha em folha pescada nas camadas do meu cérebro. E antes de ler o último poema, queria lembrar vocês que existe a possibilidade de vocês fazerem perguntas. Não esqueçam, porque se vocês não fizerem, eu vou fazer. Duplex. Começo com o amor na esperança de acabar lá. Não quero me tornar um cadáver desfigurado. Não quero deixar um cadáver desfigurado, cheio de remédios que embriagariam o sol. Alguns dos meus remédios embriagam o sol. Alguns de nós não precisam do inferno para sermos bons. Aqueles mais necessitados precisam do inferno para serem bons. Quais são os sintomas da sua doença? Eis um sintoma da minha doença. Homens que me amam são os que sentem a minha falta. Homens que me abandonam são os que sentem a minha falta. No sonho em que sou uma ilha, no sonho em que sou uma ilha, cresço verde com a esperança. Gostaria de acabar lá.
That duplex sounds better in Portuguese than it does in English. It sounds way better.
Because Portuguese is very
Gorgeous.
musical.
It's gorgeous. Brazilian Portuguese is gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
Uma coisa que eu queria muito te perguntar, e agora que a gente já deu risada junto aqui, já leu poemas, queria saber como é que foi escrever os poemas sobre brancura que tem nesse livro, que são maravilhosos.
I'll say this. It was the most freeing experience I've ever had as a poet, because I understood as I was writing them that I was completely free of writing while thinking about recognition. If you say too much about whiteness or white people in the United States, you do not win a Pulitzer Prize. You know, so I'm sorry, but it is actually very funny. When I put this book out, I put it out thinking of it as my heart of hearts. You know, I've written 3 books. This is my 3rd book. And I was like, oh, you finally got there. You really do not give a care. I mean, I'm sorry, you know, I don't know if y'all have cuss words here, but I didn't want to say care. Anyway, you really, you know what I mean? Like, you are really telling what is coming to you as the truth. So the feeling of writing the poems was a really great feeling. Writing about whiteness is very complex and deep for me, particularly when you live in a nation where assimilation is honored. You know, I grew up recognized and lauded as a kid for all the ways that I could assimilate. People will say to you very directly in the United States, oh, you did that. That was good. That was better than the white people. And so then white becomes a standard, you know, that you're always making sure you are above. As a kid, you're told, black people in the United States, this is to a person, are told, you have to be better than anyone white in order to get the littlest of anything in this world. Do you know what I mean? So I think something about that, and knowing that that experience was a real and true experience for me, was very exciting, because it wasn't terrain I had seen covered in many other people's poems, and because it meant that I was really going out on a ledge. I was taking a risk, and I was happy to take it. So when I did win the Pulitzer Prize, I was very surprised. I mean, there is a poem in this book called Good White People. So I didn't expect that this establishment, this body that we think of as the establishment, to be welcoming of this particular book. But they were. I also think I had time on my side. This book came after the protests in Ferguson, Missouri. It came after Claudia Rankine's Citizen. It came after the movie Moonlight. The summer of racial justice of 2020 in the United States is the same summer that this book was awarded the Pulitzer Prize. And so I do think there were outside influences telling that particular body of establishment, open your eyes and see. Do you know what I mean? So I'm very glad to have that honor.
E também queria que você comentasse um pouco o erotismo nos seus poemas, porque você tem vários poemas que têm ali, né, são poemas bem sensuais, são poemas que estão falando ali de prazer e de diversão, enfim. E eu acho que isso vem muito nesse caminho que a gente está falando, dos riscos que você assume nos poemas que você escreve. E eu acho que é uma parte muito bonita do livro que eu ainda não vi a crítica brasileira comentar. Eu falei, será que as pessoas estão com vergonha de comentar?
Yeah, I would be embarrassed on commenting. I am the most I can say to answer your question, Stephanie, is one day I'll die, and people will say whatever they have to say about me or about my poems, if anybody says anything. And it has always been my hope since I was a very small. Everything I know about sex, I learned from poems. I mean, everything I know about science, I learned from poems. Everything I know about history, I learned. There's so much I learned from poems. But everything I know about romance, do you know what I mean? About that feeling, about what it's like to want to be near someone. Do you know what I'm saying? All of that I learned from poems when I was a kid. I didn't have a dad sitting me down to give me the talk. Do you know what I mean? And I decided a very long time ago, my fingers are crossed. I can't control this. When I die, I just want somebody to say I was a love poet. That's what's most important to me. I mean, I would like for that to be the legacy, because I feel like that's who I am and what I am. I think my poems are love poems, no matter what they seem to be about to other people, no matter how much violence or brutality, no matter how much they cover violent and brutal history. They all come out of a sense of love. And when I say love, I mean a very intense, passionate, sensual feeling for life, for being, for communicating with others, for touch, for hugs, for cuddles, for literal lovemaking. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I keep trying to write the poems that will lead to that identity.
Gente, vocês ainda podem mandar algumas perguntas. Só tem 3 aqui, hein? Mas os seus poemas têm um componente amoroso que não é só esse amor romântico, esse amor sensual, né? Tem o amor familiar, tem várias formas de amor acontecendo ali. E eu acho que a questão é que talvez os sentimentos estão sempre atravessados pela complexidade da vida, né? Assim, amar e ser amado não é necessariamente uma coisa simples. Às vezes dói, a gente é magoado, nosso coração se parte. E eu acho que isso está ali o tempo todo também. Mas assim, o amor está lá.
Yeah, because love is at the base. You know, all of those other circumstances, the things that this translator in my ear, whatever you said, they translated as crisscross, you know. All those other things that seem to be not love, I religiously believe that there are only two feelings, and the first one is love, and then the second one is fear. And that fear is always a fear of the loss of love. So when people do horrible things, even those feelings of fear come from some sense of them feeling that they will be without love. Do you understand what I mean? And I think the base, the first emotion, the one that gets us up in the morning and makes us sleep at night is the feeling of love, right? And, you know, if we get scared, even if we're in a love relationship, a loving relationship, we do stupid stuff. I was just talking about this at lunch with somebody. When you're in love, you do dumb stuff, even to your lover. Do you know what I'm saying? And part of the reason you do dumb stuff is because it feels so good to be in love. You are scared of losing that feeling. You don't want to lose that person. Or you are scared you won't meet that person, and so you do dumb stuff. Do you know what I mean? So I think if you can remember that the base is love, then maybe you don't react out of fear.
Vou começar com as perguntas de vocês, então. Bom, temos aqui uma pergunta que é: tem poemas que você decide guardar para você mesmo, talvez por serem muito íntimos ou algo assim? Se sim, como você separa o que é seu e o que pode ser público?
There are not poems that I keep to myself because they're too intimate, because once a poem is that intimate, it's so good. And when a poem is really good and you're a poet, it's very hard to keep it to yourself. You know, the New Yorker sitting there, the Atlantic Monthly sitting there, you want them to have the poem. You know what I mean? So if I'm writing well and I have this really gorgeous thing because I'm a poet, I could see myself trying to sit on it, but I doubt that I would be able to. I would want to share a poem that worked out. There is a separation, though. I think this is another thing I love about being a poet as opposed to being a pop star. I feel pretty anonymous in the world. I feel like I can go out and still have my private life among people. As a matter of fact, when I tell people who don't know me that I'm a poet, they usually don't want to talk to me anymore. Or worse, they don't believe me. You know, you tell people you're a poet and they're like, okay, but what do you really do? You know? So I don't think I find trouble with separation. One of the wonderful things about the family I grew up in and the place where I grew up, and the wonderful thing about reading is that very few people do it. So you don't have to worry about the word getting out. Do you know what I mean? My family, there are people in my family, my cousins in particular, who are around my age, maybe a little older, maybe a little younger. My cousins are very supportive of my work. They come to my readings. They buy my books. I don't know if they actually read my books. I think they use them as coffee table pieces. You know what I mean? But my mom and dad read the Bible. And other than that, they're not doing much reading. So I don't feel fear about them reading a poem and being upset. I tell my students this all the time. My students are always worried about what their parents are going to think about their poems. And to that, I always say to them, why are you showing your parents your poems? Like, why would you take something you love to a person who you know is going to tell you to stop doing it? Don't do that. Don't ever do that. That's not a good idea. If I worked at the grocery store as a checkout person, I would not bring my parents to watch me ring people up. If I was an architect and I had designs for a new mall, I wouldn't show my mom the designs for the new mall. So why is it that when people write poems, they think they're supposed to take their poems to their parents for their parents to tell them to stop writing poems? Strangest thing in the world, if you ask me. So I feel that I'm able to separate easily. I also feel that writing poems helps me organize the trauma of my life as well as the celebrations of my life. And so I actually feel that poems help me create a private life because they organize that. They help me understand, like, oh, this is something for the world and this is something for me or for my poems. The language of poetry cannot be the same language we use to make small talk in the grocery store line. It just cannot. It's got to be a private language. Whether or not you're writing about a private thing, the language of poetry is always a private language. The reason you know that is because when you're reading a poem, you think somebody is talking to you. They don't even know you. Why do you think that? It's because the language is private. That's the intimacy we were talking about earlier.
A sua resposta agora conversa com essa outra pergunta, na qual a pessoa quer saber um pouco mais sobre o que você quis dizer quando você afirmou mais cedo que o poeta tem que se aproximar da verdade. Ele quer saber como se sabe que está se aproximando de uma verdade. De que tipo de verdade você está falando?
There's a way that you can sit down with designs on the poem. That's Keats. That's John Keats' phrase, designs. You know, there's a way that you can come to the poem with an idea of what you want the poem to be about. There's a way that you can come to the poem with an idea of what you think a poem should do. And there's a way that you can be open to letting the poem do what it will, letting the poem have elements of yourself that surprise you, that you do not see until the moment that you are writing it down. There are many writers here in the audience, so you know this feeling that as you are writing, quite literally as you are writing, you find yourself saying things you did not expect to say. When you are saying things you did not expect to say, two things are happening. One, as you are writing, generally, when that happens, you feel something. You either feel something, you know, Natasha Trethewey says she starts sweating. She knows she's writing because she starts sweating. You might feel fear. You might feel uncomfortable. You might feel jittery. You might shake a bit. I know for me, I get, when I'm really writing this, I start, you know, everything's moving. The other thing that happens is that you're telling the truth. And there's not a lot of that going on every day, all day. And that's why you're having a physical reaction in the midst of writing. So that's one way that you know you're doing it. Telling the truth also means getting something right. So, and getting something right means that when I read the line, it is so exact, it's so specific that I don't mix it up with something else. I think part of the trouble with poetry is people come to it with this idea that, oh, it's a poem, it can be anything. No! Please stop that. No, this poem is going to be what I say, and it's going to say a specific truth. That specific truth might not be, it might not be actual to the actual event. It might not be exact as the actual event. For instance, if in a poem I need to say yellow dress, but the memory is that the person had on a red dress, but yellow sounds better in the poem, yellow works better for the themes of the poem, you better bet I'm going to say yellow. Yellow rhymes with mellow. If I say the word mellow in a poem, you think I'm not going to use the word yellow? Do you see what I mean? But then for the poem, that becomes the truth because it follows the language, it follows the themes of the poem.
Temos
Lots of questions.
uma pergunta aqui de um jovem poeta que fala sobre escrever como uma forma de resistência e sobrevivência. Né? Nós temos vivido tempos bem difíceis aqui no Brasil, estamos saindo de um período muito complicado. E aí ele pergunta como você considera que a gente poderia trazer o amor com mais força, embora estejamos vivendo um contexto em que boa parte da nossa produção de poesia está cercada de revolta e desespero.
Oh, you just did. That's what you did. You just did it. Write that down. First of all, this question has in it a love of nation, a love of its people. This question has in it the desire that those people not feel that despair. This question has in it an awareness. Love always comes with awareness. Love is what makes you aware of another person's background, even if you don't know that person. Do y'all know what I mean? It makes you sensitive to the possibilities of a past that you are not aware of. That to a stranger is indeed love. Do y'all, like, when you don't assume something, when you don't know something about someone else's inner life, you are participating in an act of love. So I think this is happening in these poems in Brazil right now. I picked up one of the books that I couldn't read, and somebody was trying to translate it to me, on the moment. And I was like, oh, these poems are fine. These people are writing. Stephanie's writing. These are indeed love poems rising out of this moment. And they always will. And the poem of resistance is a poem of love. It's a love of the self. It's a love of a people, often an oppressed people. It's a love of a belief that these people don't have to be oppressed, that something different can happen. So I think this is very possible. I also think that the poem of resistance is the natural poem. That at the base of poems, we are trying to distinguish ourselves. Distinguishing oneself means pointing at yourself in spite of everyone around you. It means standing up when everybody else is sitting down. That's resistance. And that is the work that poems do no matter what. That's why when you're reading a poem, you have to shut up. You can't even hear anything in the background. You have to be still for the 27 seconds it takes to read the poem. You gotta stop. Act of love, particularly in a world where you're told to keep going and faster and work and go and get the kids and put on the food and go and work and, oh, you slept too long. Do you know what I mean? Poems ask us to stop. And the poem of resistance asks that same thing. They ask us to reconsider our lives. That's an act of love. It's good to know that, though. It's good to think about that. Often when we write, we do feel, do not get me wrong, it's not like I'm never mad when I'm writing. It's not like I'm never crying while I'm writing a poem. It's just that I know where that anger rises from. I know where those tears come from. And those tears are not born out of a complete sadness. They're born out of a desire to not be sad.
Tô ficando triste que o nosso horário está acabando.
That is sad.
Então, eu vou fazer...
I just got here. I just got to Brazil yesterday and we're already running out of time.
Não, tá acabando aqui e aí depois você vai assinar os livros dessas pessoas maravilhosas que vieram aqui te ouvir. E vou avisar a vocês que quem quiser um bis, dia 13 vai ter lançamento com Jericho Brown lá na Livraria Megafauna. Então, se vocês estão com gosto de quero mais, vocês vão aparecer lá. Mas, enfim, eu vou fazer uma última pergunta.
13th? At what time? What bookstore? People want to know.
Na Megafauna, às 7 da noite. Vai ser na terça-feira, gente.
Oh, 8 p.m. Perfect time. I'll be done with everything. I'll go over there and watch Jericho Brown.
A pergunta é sobre um comentário que você fez anteriormente sobre a necessidade de que as pessoas negras têm de, muitas vezes, ter que se provar como melhores do que as pessoas brancas para terem acesso a algumas coisas. E aí, quer saber se, na sua opinião, as artes estão ajudando a promover a igualdade entre as pessoas?
Do the what? What was...
To promote equality, to make people understand we equal.
I don't know about equality. I don't know that art promotes equality because I think that the word equality is sort of it's a word that is completely from another world than what the art world can be interested in. I mean, in terms of what art does to us. You know, you can have equality in terms of making sure that your gallery is not just, oh, all these artists in my gallery are white people. Do you know what I mean? You can work on equality that way, but I'm talking about the actual reaction to the work, the actual feeling that the work brings on, and then the change in a life that the work has, that your life has because of that change of feeling. I think that poems ask us to reconsider. I think literature asks us to reconsider our lives, and I don't know that there's anything equal about that reconsideration. I have things to reconsider that other people out here do not have to reconsider, and so there are certain poems that will ask me to reconsider. We can read the same poem, we can love the same poem, and we can reconsider two very different things. Do y'all see what I mean? So I don't know that equality is really the thing to think about as it relates to that part of what literature does, what art does to us. I hope that, yes, if enough reconsidering gets done about enough people, then we treat each other better. I hope, yes.
Bom, eu quero agradecer a todos vocês. Quero agradecer à Feira do Livro, quero agradecer à Editora Fósforo e ao Círculo de Poemas. Agradecer muitíssimo os nossos intérpretes, tradutores, que garantiram aqui a acessibilidade da nossa conversa. E vou fazer agora a última pergunta que fez a mediadora corar aqui. Jericho Brown, várias pessoas querem saber, já que você tem tanto interesse no amor, você está percebendo o quanto o povo brasileiro é amável e caloroso?
Oh, yeah, y'all are fine. I never seen so many good-looking people in my life. It's embarrassing. I can't look at some of you. I saw somebody last night who had shades on, and he took his glasses off, and I told him to put them back on so that I could look at other things. I couldn't stop looking in this man's eyes. I mean, so, yeah, I'm having a great time in Brazil. You know what else I love about? I love Brazilian Portuguese, and I love the fact that in Brazil, if you tell someone that you don't speak Portuguese and they tell you that they don't speak English, they still keep talking to you anyway. And it's really beautiful because you feel like they know. They know that you want to stand there and just listen to them speak beautifully, though you don't know a word they're saying.
Gente, muito obrigada. Agora vocês Por favor, vão para a tenda dos autógrafos.
Obrigado, obrigado.
É isso aí, muito obrigado, Stephanie, pela mediação incrível. Jericho, muito obrigado.
Sorry. It's rolling.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Was it okay?
It was beautiful.
Did we do everything we were supposed to do?
I got a note for you.
You said you think Brazilian Portuguese. What do you think of Brazilian? I like that. I like that a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you.